All right, I think we're ready for our feature presentation. So Rose Afriyie, many of you may already know her. She's presented before at Shy Hack Night several times and is a longtime friend and participant and just great, amazing person. And so we're really excited to hear about the work she's been doing with Get Cities. And so without further ado, Rose Afriyie, take it away.
Thank you so much, Derek. And thank you to the entire Shy Hack Night community for having me tonight. Hold on just a second while I share my screen and tonight's presentation. So tonight's presentation is about an exciting initiative I had the opportunity and the privilege to lead in partnership with Get Cities Chicago, the Shy Tech Survey, and specifically a report about retention at the intersections when we look at the technology sector in Chicago. So the Shy Tech Survey, as we called it, is a community initiative to understand the experiences of women, transgender, genderqueer, and non-binary technologists in the Chicagoland area. And together, what we did in partnership with Get Cities Chicago and many other organizations I'll share about soon, was we really wanted to pursue an effort to understand what lessons we might learn from technologists at the intersections about what it has been like to work in Chicago and the continued COVID era. And so just unpacking intersections and what we mean by that, we wanted to root our work in intersectionality, which is a concept that was first theorized by Kimberly Crenshaw. And it basically calls us to focus on those who are multiply burdened. So those who may have faced discrimination on the basis of not just their gender, for example, but also their race, and also the overlapping identities of the two. So this work was about getting beyond people of color or just women, but really unpacking the experiences of many different combinations of identities. So today's presentation will review first the backstory, so what led to a study like this, two, the key partners that I mentioned, then key insights from the analysis. I really want to take you through some of the things we learned along the way. The next thing is the difference Chicago makes. I think there's a huge opportunity to really think about what it means to be a part of affinity groups in Chicago and how that impacts technologists positively, the recommendations, and if there's time, new initiatives that I'm pursuing in the vein of gender equality in the tech ecosystem. So first things first, I started my technology career in Google in Chicago, back when it was on 20 West Kinsey Street, and not too long after the company started publicly sharing data on the demographics of technologists. And so this was during a time not too long after they published the findings that 2% of their workforce was Black. So the issue of the demographics of technology has been something that I've had a lot of exposure to for now more than a decade of my life. So soon after that, I really wanted to go on and make even greater of an impact after Google. So I co-founded mRelief, the easy-to-use platform online and text messaging for Americans to sign up for SNAP, or the food stamp program. And for those newer to Shy Hack Night, mRelief started as a breakout group at Shy Hack Night, serving just the Chicagoland area. And we went on to effectively scale our platform nationally and connected more than 3 million people to SNAP, or the food stamp program. But one of the key things to note about our team is that we achieved this great milestone, being a majority woman team, inclusive of those who are gender nonconforming, and also being a maturity BIPOC team. And we still continue to have really large diversity today. So after transitioning to the board of mRelief, I wanted to spend some time understanding inclusion by race and gender in the workforce for technology in the larger Chicagoland area ecosystem where we built mRelief. And so backed by Get Cities Chicago and an ecosystem of affinity groups, the Shy Tech Survey was born. And to ensure we could examine the perspectives of technologists, we partnered with organizations across the ecosystem in Chicago. So many of these logos you might know or already be a part of. The huge shout out, especially to Latinas in Tech Chicago and NSBE Chicago, who really worked with us to design our survey, design this research. And then logos you don't see here, but also were instrumental in helping with this amazing analysis and this overall effort is usertesting.com, as well as DataKind, who actually conducted the analysis. So now I want to share a little bit more about the actual results. So first things first, for our quantitative survey, we had 406 respondents. We were able to include 13.3% of people who are genderqueer, non-binary, and transgender amongst the technologists that we surveyed. And so for this study, I think one thing to note is that we wanted to center women, transgender, non-binary, and genderqueer folks. So no men were, cisgender men were surveyed for this survey. So just so you have a sense of the distribution of gender there. And then the other thing to note is that we featured significant constituencies when we look at, again, specifically the tech workforce of Black and Brown technologists, with 15.8% Black African-American technologists, as well as 14.7% Hispanic, Latina, Latin technologists. So what did we learn? So the key thing we learned was that 93.1% of Chicago women, transgender, genderqueer, and non-binary technologists plan to actually stay in the field over the next 12 months. However, when we look at just more data we conducted throughout this analysis, 51% say they have a positive experience, right? And so we have just like a very different results when we ask people to look beyond just retention and staying in the field. And so why are people staying? So one of the motivations of technologists staying is compensation. So that was selected the most by technologists who were asked, which of the following factors contribute to your current decision to stay in technology? So we see that more than 2/3, or 67.7%, cited compensation, with advancement being selected second to that at 65.3%. So the thing that's really fascinating about this data that we did is when we consider race, it actually changed and told a more complex story about retention. So advancement and compensation are tied first for Black technologists with a 19.4% frequency rate, but second to that, inclusion and management tied. And so while, again, when you look at the overall data, compensation is the leader, it's really a little bit more complicated when you look at this demographic. The same holds true when we look at Asian and Latina, Latin technologists. Specifically, we have advancement in the lead over compensation in those demographic groups. And so I think that was also really, really important to note. The next thing to know about what we learned is management is a significant factor when we consider retention. So 88.7% of technologists who plan to stay over the next 12 months agreed or strongly agreed with the statement, "My manager and I have a good working relationship." And so conversely, those who indicate they plan to leave their role, like their manager, 22.6% less. And so just underscoring the importance of management, not just in demographics that really have it as like the second highest thing that contributes to retention, but I think overall for technologists was a big call to action of this report. And then I think the other thing that we really wanted to understand a little better was work perks and just what we learned when we talked to technologists about, or surveyed technologists about what are the key things that matter. So of full-time technologists working remotely or in a hybrid capacity, 54% of technologists would leave their employer if they lost the ability to work remotely. So that's a pretty decisive majority. And I'd like to think that this report adds to the overall conversation on remote work and the importance of remote work, at least in some capacity, as we think about the tech workforce moving forward. We also asked technologists to rank the healthcare benefits that were the most important to them. And you'll see here on the right that having 100% of their plan covered by their employer was like the #1 benefit by frequency. And that was followed by basically comprehensive plan options, so spanning the triumvirate of vision, dental, and just overall healthcare. And so those are things I think employers, HR departments, hiring managers should be thinking about as they review annually their benefits packages. So what's more? So we also learned the key difference Chicago makes. So this was a really super exciting stat. So technologists affiliated with affinity groups are 5% more likely to have someone they trust to soundboard decisions. That was really exciting to learn that you really have more support in this demographic. And it was just super exciting in general to just work with a number of these organizations on the plaque here to advance this report. But I think the other thing that was really important as a takeaway is that we still have definitely a long way to go and work to do when we're thinking about inclusion in the tech workforce. So I think one notable stat is that Black technologists of all surveyed genders in their roles basically are least likely to be retained than any other group at 67.9%. And so that's something that is worth looking into further in terms of why that is the case. Of course, we know that there are multiple different reasons why people stay in this demographic, but I think that it requires even further study. Additionally, we learned specifically among technologists who identify as Latina, Latin, here we found 38.6% do not have someone they can trust to help them get promoted, compared to 34.9% of white technologists. So that's a pretty significant disparity as we're thinking about what are the supports that people can rely on as they're thinking about their future in an organization and advancement, which was really important for this demographic in particular, as we talked about the importance of this a few slides earlier. And then one of the other really alarming stats that we saw here is that when we look at genderqueer, transgender, and nonbinary technologists as a group, 51% do not have someone they can trust to help them get promoted. So that is a huge challenge that we need to be looking into. And I think one of the things I'm really proud about with this specific study is that we really were able to have enough of a contingent of basically non-cisgendered folks so that we could really examine what are some of the disparities in the tech workforce. And really excited to have partnered with amazing organizations like Out in Tech to really be able to find technologists in this demographic. So now let's talk about the key recommendations. So I think first things first, mentorship came up as a huge intervention that could help specifically with supporting promotions. So having people within workforces that could play just a more active role in supporting technologists in this demographic. The second piece is management resources. While the report itself links quite a few resources from HBS to the Life Learning Labs Institute, they're key resources available to enable good working relationships because of how important it is to overall retention in the tech field. The third, and I think one of the most important calls of this report, is measuring at the intersections. So at previous workplaces I've been at, it was often said, you can't manage what you don't measure, right? And I think there's a huge opportunity in the tech workforce to really be managing the right things because you're getting the data right. And so really a call to be thinking more inclusively about how you're grouping some of the surveys that you do, that it's not good enough to just have the catch-all bucket for people of color, the catch-all bucket for women and men. We really have to be thinking in greater nuance. And then the final thing that was really important for us is overall continued research. Really, really important for us to be continuing some of the research, as I mentioned, around why within certain groups there are huge challenges in terms of retention or promotion. So thank you so much for having me and really being able to listen to the report. If there's a few minutes, I will share about just new and future work in the same vein. So coming up for me is I am going to be continuing research on gender equality in the vein of gender equality, but with some additions. So I'm really thinking a lot about gender, race, and housework, and building a directory on technologies to reduce women's time spent on housework. And by women, I mean women, transgender, non-binary, and genderqueer folks. And specifically, this problem has been born out of some of the actual data, specifically a new data set that came out this year by Pew Research Center that shows that even when women earn the same as or out-earn their husbands, they spend 2.5 more hours each day on housework compared to their partners. So I think that is a huge gap in quality and something worthy of evaluation and intervention. And so what's next for me is thinking about intersectionality within the context of this, as well as thinking about key directories that can be surfaced to really help delegate more housework to technology, and especially considering this new era of generative AI that we are in, as well as a lot of other hardware that exists that may not be as accessible or just top of mind for folks. So thank you so much again, Derek and the Shy Hack Night team. Would love to take questions and also continue conversations about our data set in the subsequent session.
All right, thank you, Rose. So yeah, folks who are watching, you can go ahead and if you have questions, type them into the chat and we will get to them in the order in which they were asked. I actually just see Lori has the first one from the audience. And her question is, did the survey look at titling or seniority? And if so, was the breakdown in early, mid, senior career technologists in the respondents?
Yes, so we actually did. I know we only had about 20 to 25 minutes here today. We have an entire section that looks at the comparisons between entry-level, mid-career, senior, et cetera. I think one of the really interesting things is that I know one of the landmark studies on this was by AnitaB.org, and really looking at specifically mid-career technologists and some of the big challenges women specifically, just because that's who they surveyed when they did that study have. And our study also corroborated that still in 2022, when our period of measurement, that is still a huge issue for mid-career technologists in particular. They seem to struggle with advancement more than any other demographic. And so, yeah, I think we also did a few other breakouts on that in terms of compensation and where compensation is likely to come from. So I encourage you to look at the report and look at the breakouts, but really, really interesting data on those demographics specifically.
Mm-hmm. I'm kind of curious. I hadn't heard of the AnitaB survey, but can you say more about that? Like, when was it done? Like, sort of, where did it cover?
Yeah.
Was it more like national or broader in scope?
Yeah, they were a national study. So not just looking at like one geography. And it was specifically focused on mid-career technologists and like really highlighting some of the big challenges that technologists who are mid-career have. I believe they also focused on software engineers. So our survey actually focused across the technology spectrum. So people who are focusing on data, math, science, and design at least once a day, or specifically who met a rubric of being in one of our roles for technology in a taxonomy that we created. But yeah, so that was effectively the Anita Borg study, and I'm happy to drop that link too and share more about that in the after group.
Yeah, for sure. Excellent. Next questions from Michael. He says, great presentation, really fascinating results. Apologies if I missed it, but what was the total sample size? And did you recruit for the survey to make sure you got a diverse sample? And then maybe to add to that, I am kind of curious, how did you get the word out about this survey?
Yeah, so we actually combined multiple methods. So there were 406 respondents for this survey. And we did benchmark it based on the technology population. So that was like our minimum was 380, I believe, but we ended up getting 406. And in terms of recruitment, we basically ran a membership engagement strategy across an array of organizations in Chicago. Some of the logos I shared with you We also combined that with usertesting.com to support randomization. And then we also ran digital marketing campaigns to engage Chicagoland area technologists on LinkedIn in particular and Google AdWords to be able to bring a really comprehensive set of data to the table for this analysis.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I could imagine LinkedIn would be a really good space because there's a lot of engagement, and it's tied so closely to obviously the professional sphere, in which that's where LinkedIn is really living. So that makes a lot of sense. I think I remember seeing, did we share it in the Chi-Hacknet Slack? I think we might have, didn't we?
Yes, you did. Oh my gosh. Yeah.
So if you're watching, thank you for sending your response.
I know. Thank you.
We got another question from Michael. So what was your process for developing the survey? Did you have any qualitative work beforehand to find out what to ask for, or any plans for future qualitative work to explore the results more?
Yeah, so it should be noted that we did actually both a quantitative and qualitative survey alongside one another. I didn't know how much time I would have, or else I would get into the juicy bits of the Vader analysis and the sentiment analysis that we did. But I guess I'll say that in terms of those two ways in which we gathered data, we had the quantitative data set that was based on the 406, and then we had 177 qualitative responses. And that was primarily driven by our partnership with usertesting.com. Anything I missed with that question? I think there was something else.
Just talking about future plans for exploring the results more.
I'm not sure yet, but I know that in general, a lot of amazing research is being done at Get City Chicago. And so my sense is that they'll probably be excited about just some of the intersections of what's happening in technology workforces for the duration.
Yeah, I would say we do have a little time if you did want to dive into a little bit of the qualitative data, and you mentioned doing like sentiment analysis. I'm quite curious, and you mentioned that was a data kind that helped do some of the analysis as well. Do you want to talk a little bit about that too?
Yes, I would love to. So one, I'll just say that the data kind, it was such a comprehensive effort. We did what's called their data dive. It's a method of sourcing data scientists within their community to analyze data. So we were in DC at their local university, really being able to engage folks. And then Taylor Wilson was one notable data science volunteer who did a substantial analysis in Python. And so one of the methods that we used, as I mentioned, was Vader, or the Valence-Aware Dictionary for Sentiment Reasoning. And basically that allowed for us to analyze 177 respondents who answered the question, what has your overall experience been in the technology fields as a woman, transgender, genderqueer, non-binary person? And that's basically where we were able to do an analysis on some of the answers that people gave to that, and be able to also attribute a score of how positive, negative, neutral responses were. And then one of the things that ended up happening, because we did have to actually go in and correct for the model, which I guess we utilized the method of analyst augmented predictions, that I served the role of reclassifying any responses the model missed. So when you think about things of like people talking about things being hard or challenging, that sometimes challenging in and of itself may not be scored as like a negative thing, but it actually, but in the context of the actual answer choices, it was challenging in a negative way. And so being able to really make sure that we could assign the right charge, if you will, being negative or positive to those answer choices was really critical for us. And then I think the other thing that I'll just note is that Vader analysis, they'll consider a wide range of English language nuances. So punctuation to also, and assign a value of negative or positive to things. And it was really just, I think, a really valuable method that I would recommend for people who are trying to parse and classify human responses, basically based on sentiment.
Interesting. It makes me also think a little bit about, obviously, like algorithmic bias, right? And if you're using a process, it sounds like you have the ability to kind of have an intervention and go in and correct if it was off. But I'm kind of curious, was that like, was there concern like from the get-go, kind of from worrying about the potential biases and how those algorithms could skew the results?
Absolutely. I think we were really sure, we felt really good going in that we were going to have at least another level of analysis beyond just the Vader. And so that we weren't actually going to just submit an analysis that was just sort of the score by like a matter of just like the digit of positive, because that's what Vader actually provides. We knew that this was something that we also wanted to have human analysis of to like correct for bias. And so, yeah, I think it's been really interesting utilizing Vader. And I think I'm curious about future models that exist and how they might work even better if they were trained on things like Me Too, right? Because I think the limitations of Vader that people should be aware of is that it's just a much larger data set of the World Wide Web at its finest on social
Not
media,
so
right?
fine.
And I think that, to really tamp down on algorithmic bias, we want to be thinking just more specifically about data sets by allowing for training for hashtags that have presented nuances like Me Too or Black Lives Matter, for example, and what it would look like to have more models that have that input instead of just sort of larger input.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's always one of those things that like I'm always skeptical of, and it's like kind of infuriating hearing from data scientists who just like throw data into an algorithm and like no questions asked and be like, boop, here's the numbers, right? And like that's never a good idea. Like you're asking for getting, bad results or inaccurate results. So I mean, I hear you. It seems like there's so much work to do to change the sort of like corpus of information that these algorithms take in. But honestly, like I don't know how long that will take. And like in the meantime, it sounds like what you did is like a critical and necessary step for any legitimate analysis. Is you have to have someone who understands the subject matter and can go in, and it's not just you're combining your expert hands-on knowledge with obviously the computing power of the algorithm, and it's that combination that actually really makes it potent and powerful. But like if you just take one or the other, like they're really like not, they don't add up to the greater than the sum of their parts. You really need both pieces to it.
Yeah, 100%. And I would definitely just advise that I think for project managers or research departments who are thinking of doing similar studies, that they really should be budgeting in time capacity to go beyond just some of these models and to be really factoring in the time of subject matter experts who can provide that other layer of analysis. So that you're not just, getting this down to just like a number that can lead to a false impression of positive experiences in this case. But yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And it can be challenging. I know just from doing some machine learning projects of our own to connect the subject matter experts and get them close enough to the algorithms. Because I mean, technology, so you were able to kind of go in and know what to do, right? Like I'm labeling, I'm going in, I'm like, you're kind of getting in there.
Right.
That's kind of a learning step that a lot of people don't understand. Like I mean, in many ways, machine learning algorithms are just sort of described as this magic box, and it's like it goes in and numbers come out, and it's like you kind of have to get in there and fiddle with it. So I assume you obviously had like an advantage having that background, but I'm kind of curious if you'd heard anything about like ways to bring those subject matter experts closer to the algorithms.
Yeah, I mean, I really think it is about training on classification, right? And also like thinking about individual bias as well. And so I think it's really, when you think about these project management efforts, and this was a significant undertaking that took us, I think if we're just looking at the period of collection and analysis, a full 12 months, right? And so I think really being able to note that a part of that process might need to be extended. Maybe it might need to be 12 to 14 months to get subject matter experts up to speed, to make sure that they feel comfortable about how they're going to be implementing the categorization. And that also perhaps that gets a second look, because I did send that back to our analyst for review as well, and I think those are the things that really make all the difference to make sure that everybody feels good about the data and it's gone through multiple stages of review.
Yeah, wow, I'm really glad you did that. And it's really cool to get the opportunity to talk about that piece, because that's what some of those things, it's just like data science is just going to solve this for us, right? And there's just like so much more under that.
Yeah. I mean, and I think we need to be talking more in general about assisted intelligence, and the idea that these are tools, right, that can help us get to a place, and then we have to do our pass, right? And I think, the idea that what you'll end up doing, in the words of Virginia Eubanks, is automating inequality, right? When you just rely that is the first resort, right? Instead of really thinking about bringing human compassion and human context to really sensitive situations where it's merited. So, yeah.
Right on. We have more questions. Next one's from Steve Ediger. Do you have a sense of how, Steve? Yeah. Do you have a sense of how the option to join a worker cooperative where the organization is flat and consensual would play in with those you have surveyed? So, are you familiar with worker cooperatives and maybe how this could relate to that?
Yeah, we did not examine that. And I do think that could play a role. I think the thing that we most examined, right, Steve, was us thinking about, well, who's a part of these amazing, robust resources in the Chicagoland area that really do not exist everywhere, around these affinity groups like NSBE Chicago, Latinas in Tech Chicago, and that we started to see some impact. But what I would love to do, and if there's support for future work, is really be thinking about things like that. Could it be worker cooperatives or other formations that really ensure that employees have more of a voice and, can have other ways of being heard and see change in their workplaces? So, yeah.
Yeah, right on. I think Lori has another question, which is, do you see differences by gender in pathways into technology? For example, career switching or being self-taught versus formally trained?
That's a great question. Oh my gosh, I just did a write-up on this for an amazing mentor of mine. So I'm so glad that you asked it. So one of the really interesting things about our study is that I also wanted to go beyond, and this was not in the reports. I actually just did this as a follow-up. So this is just something, maybe there'll be like the notes after as an addendum. Was that I wanted to understand what the role of education was for technologists who were going into technology. And the thing that I thought was really interesting was that while we did have a majority of respondents have a 4-year university or college degree, 59%, followed by high school, at 21.4%, like exclusive high school. I think one of the things that was really interesting is that self-taught was 12.1%, and academy or boot camp was 11.3%. And they represented significant portion of respondents. And again, it's not mutually exclusive, but I thought that was really interesting that we had more people citing just like the array and the diversity of technology that brings you into the tech workforce. I thought our survey was a real opportunity to tell a more complete story about that. And that's also something that I would encourage people to do more and more, is to really provide just more avenues for people to talk about how are you building your expertise. We also ask people, if they learned on the job, for example, as another way of being able to just demonstrate their expertise. And for technologists, that was 13.3% of folks who said, okay, I've also been taught on the job, and that's another way in which I'm bringing expertise to the table. And so that's a great question, Lori. And I think it's a huge opportunity for us to just go beyond high school, college, or master's, right? I know I'm a product of boot camps in the Chicagoland area, and it was super instrumental in helping provide some of the context that I then later used to be able to be a leader and author of this important study.
Yeah, and just even thinking anecdotally about the folks that come to Chi Hack Night, there's always a strong showing of folks who came from boot camps.
Yeah.
And there's quite a few people, although they think they're alone, but there are a lot of people who are self-taught who show up, so yeah, it's like we're seeing what you've seen in your data. We've seen it at Chi-Hackman. We have, frankly, for years, right? So it's good to see that in formal studies like this.
So awesome. Yeah, no, I'm super excited. And I think, the proportion of individuals that take alternative paths to acquire their tech skills is definitely an area of continued research too.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Michael has another one. Have there been similar surveys in other US cities, and how does Chicago compare?
Oh, that's a good question. Because there's some there, I think they measured different things. I can't say exactly how Chicago compares, but I can point you in the direction of other studies that have been done at the intersections. KPOR, they funded a study at the intersections that I think is really interesting and worthy of note.
How do you
The
spell
other
that?
thing, KPOR, KAPOR,
Okay.
they backed a study that also came up as a resource as we were building out this study. We also did a really extensive review of literature in our appendix for our study, so please feel free to look at that. I'm just continuing to follow the space to see how people are thinking about this analysis. And I really do think that, and for us, it's the Chicagoland area, so we went beyond just Chicago. But I do think that there's a huge opportunity for cities to be thinking about how they can support locally their tech workforces and be thinking about diversity, especially, because we're not, just like a really diverse city. We're not the only diverse city out there. And so, yeah, I think there's a huge opportunity, but not off the tip of my tongue do I know the actual breakouts and comparisons, but it's a good question.
Yeah. Another one from Lori. We have some very interested audience members.
Yeah.
So another question is, what advice would you have for a company trying to foster more mentorship for women and trans non-binary employees? What does successful mentorship look like?
That's a great question. So one, I think, I know that Get City Chicago has continued the work by starting and launching a mentorship lab. That's in partnership with some of the great affinity organizations that have been mentioned here. I know Latinas in Tech Chicago, for example, they are providing robust mentorship options for Latinas in the Chicagoland area and beyond. And so I think the advice that I would have is that one, don't try to reinvent the wheel. Reach out to your local affinity organizations first to see what offerings they have and just what availability exists to partner on these efforts. So I think that that's the first thing. And I think when you think about local organizations, you shouldn't just be thinking about, by race, but also the organizations that exist across gender, right? So really be thinking about organizations like Out in Tech and going even beyond those organizations as well. So don't reinvent the wheel, but also I would say read the report and think about some of the calls to action, not just about just some of the challenges and disparities around promotions, but also management, because I think that that's something that's a really holistic review that people should be investing in year over year anyway, because of just how impactful it is to retention across organizations. And so that's how I would think about it. And I'm also really excited that we're in this era where there's so many resources to help managers. A lot of the information is free too, whether we're talking things like the Management Center or Life Learning Labs, which is a new, I think, favorite among organizations that I've had the privilege to be on the board. But I just think really tooling and thinking about continuous improvement for managers is another huge investment when you think about supporting these workforces.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right on. And that's actually a good segue into actually one of the first questions that I had when you were giving your presentation, which is, so it looks, the report came out in April.
Yeah.
It's like a little over a month. So it hasn't had a ton of time to sort of like spread around to everywhere yet. But I am kind of curious, it's been out. Have there been reactions from folks in industry, to this report and to the action steps that you call for?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that I've been really excited to see how on LinkedIn people have engaged across the ecosystem who are in decision-making positions. I think it's been overwhelmingly positive that people see this as actionable. Like, okay, I can invest in managers. I also see the through line between management investment and supporting underrepresented technologists like African-American technologists who are saying like, this is number 2 for me in terms of whether I would stay in the tech field or not, right? So those types of things. Also being able to think about other lower lift things like, okay, we run an annual census at our organization. We can actually think about identity at the intersections and like ask more detailed questions around gender and not just, man, woman, and other, right? We can go further and get greater specificity to see what supports might exist or could exist for this demographic in our workforce. So I do think that while, I think one of the fears I had when we first got the results of the report was, obviously technology has had a lot of layoff headlines. It is mentioned in the report. And with compensation being one of the key drivers, I think there was some of a concern that, wow, that could be very difficult given this financial environment or what could be a pending recession, et cetera. But this is not just about increasing compensation where it's due or promotions where it's due. I think it's about a more holistic support and a holistic approach. And so I think the other thing that I'll just say too is I'm writing this as someone who's been underrepresented in the field, but I'm also writing this as a founder who has had to make some of these decisions. And it is not easy to do that. And it's not easy to build something from the ground up and try to support your workforce. And so in recognition of that, I think there has to be a holistic recommendation approach here and not just sort of, all we can do here is throw money at the situation to make an impact. It's not to say those who are in a position where they can recognize equity and compensation and advancement shouldn't do that, but that it's also about the other things that you can do as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I'll also echo, like, as a small business owner, it feels like oftentimes you're swimming upstream, like swimming against the current, just
Yeah.
with it is, it's the water we swim in, right?
Yeah.
Is this, right? It's not just in
Yeah.
tech, it's in all of society. And it's just, we're like, zooming in on tech, but it exists everywhere. And it's just something that requires, you can't just throw money at it. You have to, it's sort of a little bit or a lot everywhere, like all the time, right? And it's a lot of work. And I would also say that it really helps, I would say, again, as a small business owner, like to have resources like this, right? A lot of folks want to do the right thing and just don't know what to do.
Right.
Or don't, like, maybe worse, have good intentions and then like fumble it so
Right.
badly.
Oh, yeah.
Right. And so having resources like this is like really critical because, a lot of folks are kind of feeling like they're out there walking blind, because there is just, this is not is becoming more and more common, but to focus on these kinds of efforts. But it's certainly, there's not nearly enough. It's not normal. Yeah. It's not like the common default practice for a lot of places. So resources like this are just so critical, I would say.
Thank you. And thank you to Get City Chicago and DataKind, who made this effort possible, of course, and all the amazing technologists that have chosen to stay in the force against what are still challenging odds. So I'm really excited I've had that level of engagement and partnership to do this work.
Excellent. Well, I think that's a great note to end on. Yeah, we're just about at the hour anyway, so that works out. So Rose, thank you again. This is a really amazing presentation. I encourage everyone who's watching to read the report if you haven't already and dive into it. Share it with folks, share it with people you know, share it with those managers and business owners, right? All of that. Because there's just some really valuable information here that I think, and some actionable things that I think folks can take now. So thank you again, Rose.
Thank you.
And I think for the transition to the second part of this evening, as I mentioned at the beginning, we have a breakout session that's going to happen in a moment. Yes, excellent. So this is we're about to start the post-presentation Zoom call. You can go to it right now at bit.ly/CHN remote Zoom, and you can meet your fellow Hacknators. I think, Rose, you're also going to be popping in if folks are really interested in diving more deeply into any of the things we talked about or any of the questions that we had. I think, Rose, sounds like you'll be able to stick around for a little bit for that.
Yep.
So with that, I think we will wrap it up. So thank you again, and go forth and hack.